Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. This is Boris Zinghausen with you. Today is May 12th and we have a lot of very important news. Donald Trump believes and predicts that this week will be the greatest in terms of peace negotiations in Ukraine. And Volodymyr Zelensky will personally be waiting for Putin in Istanbul, Tatuto, on Thursday. And the main question will be, will Putin actually come? The Kremlin still hasn't agreed to an unconditional ceasefire. And Donald Trump made another very important statement that put Putin in a truly difficult position. We'll talk about this and more. And also about North Korean resorts, which have opened their arms to Russians. But there's one nuance. That's what we'll be talking about in today's episode, and not just that. It's going to be interesting. So if this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's get into it. So US President Donald Trump has agreed to support the coalition of the Willings plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine. This plan was discussed in Kyiv just the other day. And let me remind you, this plan is very simple. First, an unconditional ceasefire for 30 days and then negotiations. This is being reported by Politico. But two of the newspaper's sources among European officials hint that the US president tends to change his mind quickly. I think Ukraine knows and understands this better than anyone and has experienced it firsthand. But this is an absolutely accurate observation. You know what's important here. It's important not to let Trump talk to Putin or anyone from his inner circle until Putin is pressured into agreeing to a ceasefire. Because Donald Trump, as many have already noticed, absorbs the thoughts of the last person he spoke with like a sponge and then starts repeating them. By the way, this isn't something new. It's a very typical trait of narcissists. They don't have their own identity. That is, they unconsciously steal bits and pieces from others, not just catchy phrases, but also conclusions, thoughts, even actions that, in their opinion, might win public approval and then present them as their own. Sometimes it gets to the point of being ridiculous, even a bit creepy. For example, you might tell a narcissist a completely true story from your own life, and after some time, they'll tell you that same story, passing it off as their own. I think some of you have encountered a situation like this. Or in a group setting, you might be surprised to find the narcissist telling a story about a mutual acquaintance, presenting it as if it happened to them. This theft of other people's identities is exactly why narcissists often claim to be pilots, tank operators, businessmen, artists, I don't know, even scientists. All up at once, all rolled into one. And you know what else? Narcissists act impulsively in this regard. That is, they don't think through these lies in detail, so they often get caught even with the simplest fact-checking. But they don't care. They honestly couldn't care less whether you catch them or not. They'll just pretend nothing is happening. Far more dangerous than narcissists, and in this sense, we actually got lucky with Donald Trump, are highly functional psychopaths. Those people plan out their lies down to the smallest detail. By the way, speaking of identity theft, there's an excellent film on the topic. It's called The Apprentice. It was released in 2024. This is a film, an autobiographical drama about Donald Trump. After watching it, you'll immediately understand whose identity he absorbed, and in many details, too, from using bronzer on his skin to that very distinctive way of speaking. So let's move on. That was a bit of a digression. Now, let's get to the news. As Donald Trump would say, are we on the verge of a tremendous deal or not? U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will visit Turkey from May 14th to 16th, according to the State Department. Rubio will take part in an informal NATO ministerial meeting. One of the topics will be resolving the issue of the war in Ukraine. Naturally, the key goal of the visit will be a possible meeting and direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. And the day before, Donald Trump, in an extremely emotional manner with a bunch of exclamation marks, wrote the following: Ukraine must immediately agree to negotiations with Russia in Turkey. At the meeting, Moscow and Kyiv will be able to determine whether a peace agreement is possible. And if not, then European leaders and the US will know where things stand and will be able to act accordingly. This is a very important passage. Let me come back to it again. Now, I continue quoting Trump, and I'm starting to doubt that Ukraine will agree to a deal with Putin, who is too busy celebrating the victory in World War II, a victory that would have been absolutely impossible without the USA. Hold the meeting right now. Donald Trump wrote with 3 exclamation marks. So I'm coming back to this phrase. European leaders and the US will know what the situation is and will act further according to the circumstances. This is like a prelude to a potentially very unpleasant scenario for Russia, because Ukraine has already done everything and said everything, confirming its willingness to at least ceasefire for 30 days and sit down at the negotiating table. Regarding direct negotiations, Zelensky said, "That's it. I'm waiting for you, Putin, in Istanbul on Thursday. One-on-one, come out and face me." This very phrase is exactly about sanctions and increasing pressure on Russia. Because Europe is ready, though the United States is ready, and there is simply no room left for maneuver for Putin. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And if you are already subscribed, make sure to check if the notification bell is turned on. YouTube's new algorithms sometimes behave strangely. Well, this is quite a vegetable garden. A vegetable garden, he says, a hefty stone, though a real brick. A chunk of rock was thrown right into Putin's backyard. Putin, just pay attention to how this is all about resentment. Trump couldn't hold back his resentment, and he's very emotional. Putin, who in Trump's opinion is too busy celebrating the victory in World War II, a victory he never would have achieved without the US. Putin is starting to really get on Trump's nerves with these attempts to stall for time. But not just because of that. If it were only that, he would be fine. He got angry over something completely different. What really infuriated Trump was the joint statement and the hugging with Xi Jinping in Neptun on the parade podium, as well as the statements made beforehand. That's what truly got under Donald Trump's skin. In his view, well, Trump says, without the US, you simply wouldn't have won World War II. And yet, during the parade, he's hugging Xi Jinping on the podium. How can that be? With Trump's main rival. And the day before, he makes a completely unacceptable statement about US policy and its role in global security. He blatantly accuses the US of hegemonism and does so while sitting right next to the main enemy of the United States, Xi Jinping. That's very insulting. Trump doesn't tolerate that kind of thing. And it's even more offensive when, before the parade, Putin specifically highlights the contributions of the Chinese people in the fight against Nazism. And the US isn't even mentioned separately. He just uses the general term allies, and that's it. And of course, you get it, right? All of Donald Trump's triggers came out in that post he wrote. And it's all because Putin is already stretched so thin. Doing such a split that just a little more, and as they say, his underwear will rip, because you can't praise both the US and China at the same time. The great geostrategist has played himself into a corner, and there's yet another blow straight to Donald Trump's heart, a critique from both Putin and Xi Jinping aimed at Donald Trump's Golden Dome. It's basically a whole combo here. Really, this is the perfect time to work with lobbyists. I mean, Ukraine, its allies, and of course, Trump's closest circle. There's no need to convey any complex, multi-layered ideas. You don't need to say that Putin is cunning and trying to outsmart Donald Trump. No, you shouldn't do that. By the way, Trump himself believes that no one can outsmart him. He's the king of deals. There's no need to argue with that. He's the king, and that's that. What you need to get across to Trump is one simple idea, that Putin is deliberately downplaying the role of the United States in World War II. And elevates the role of China, separately praising it. And what else? The best, the most unique, the most brilliant, the most golden project, Golden Dome, Putin together with Xi Jinping, called a sham, called it a threat. Can you imagine? I myself. Can you imagine, Donald? At first I didn't believe it myself. He just went and announced it publicly. That's how you have to knock and try to get through to Donald Trump, taking into account his, of course, psychological type. And also I'd add, he and Xi Jinping were laughing together there behind the scenes. I don't know what they were laughing about, but I only heard two words, Trump and USA. That's how it should be done. You don't need all these complicated ideas. That's how you can move. Donald Trump emotionally. So the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, promised to personally wait for Putin at the negotiations in Turkey on May 15th. Quote, "We are waiting for a ceasefire starting Monday, a complete, long-lasting one to provide the necessary foundation for diplomacy. There is no point in prolonging the killing, and I will wait for Putin in Turkey on Thursday. Personally, I hope that this time the Russians will not look for reasons why they cannot come." Oh, they definitely will. They definitely will. By the way, what do you think? Will Putin fly to Turkey on Thursday or not? Write your opinion in the comments. And keep in mind, it was Putin himself who suggested this time and place. I've already mentioned that. He must have been under serious pressure, since he didn't get away with another vague statement. Russia has always wanted and strived for negotiations, but the Kiev regime, up to the Anglo-Saxons, the Ukro-Nazis, the Ukro-Saxons, take your pick. They are the ones standing in our way. There's one thing, to consider. Putin never said he would personally take part in the negotiations in Istanbul. And another thing, doing something under pressure from the US, Europe, Ukraine, well, that's just not the way real men do things, right? Or to use Putin's diplomatic language, it would be kind of beneath us. Isn't that so? So it feels like Putin himself might not be in Istanbul, but I think he'll send someone. By the way, friends, let me remind you that the war isn't over, and when there will be a ceasefire is still unclear. Meanwhile, our soldiers on the front lines now and behind enemy lines are simply making history, performing truly heroic deeds. That's why I want to remind you that we have a very important fundraiser for the Freedom of Russia Legion. I understand that all this talk about ceasefires has dampened the mood to help, but our soldiers need this support now more than ever. So, the link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video and also in the comments. If you're watching on my channel, or even if you're not, there's a QR code right here. You can use it to go directly to the Legion's fundraising page. And in the description of this video, there's also a PayPal link for those who want to help from abroad to destroy the filth that has invaded our country. For this, you always have my deepest thanks, both from our guys and from me personally. So what do we have with these negotiations? For a month and a half now, Ukraine has been repeating over and over about an unconditional ceasefire, constantly making statements about it. Putin isn't ready, doesn't want to, squirms, once again, trying to pass off a ceasefire for a couple of days. As if it's a real desire for peace, just isn't working anymore. That's why the coalition of the willing, having secured Trump's support, is making a bold move. Macron, Starmer, Tusk, and Merz visit Kyiv and, by the way, discuss a very specific plan for a 30-day ceasefire with details. Who will monitor, who will control, and so on. After that, Macron calls Trump and says it's been agreed with Ukraine, now it's just Putin left. But instead of agreeing to a ceasefire, Putin suggests meeting and talking again. That's where we are, right now. And now it turns out that on one side of the barricade are the coalition of the willing, the United States and Ukraine, while on the other side is Putin. And Trump, who apparently is losing patience, wrote that they're waiting for Istanbul and everything will become clear and understandable there. Everything is perfectly clear. I think that sending Lavrov or some general to Istanbul for talks, or Senator Karasin just to spout some nonsense again about how Russia's interests need to be taken into account without specifying what those interests are, or about how the root causes need to be addressed without saying what those root causes are. That's it. That won't work anymore. Right now, Putin is probably standing in front of one of those old school oval mirrors, applying brown Leningrad mascara to his eyebrows, trying to figure out how he can buy himself more time, how he can stall. There's an old tried and true KGB method that Putin might use. I think everyone knows it, and Russia has pulled it off more than once. That is, to blow something up on their own territory, for example, some residential buildings like they did in 1999. And of course, to blow them up together with Russian citizens, preferably at night when everyone is at home, and then blame Ukraine for it, saying that after something like this, there can be no negotiations whatsoever. So, Russians, if I were you right now, before Istanbul, I would be most afraid of Putin himself. Or they might hit one of their own nuclear power plants. I mean, these are their methods. Or, for example, launch an FPV drone with pyrotechnics at the Kremlin from a neighboring building and claim that something sacred was attacked. They've driven Putin, as they say, to a suitcase mood. But there's one important nuance, the clumsy FSB agents are bound to mess something up somewhere, just like with the Ryazan sugar, just like with Crocus City Hall, just like with the metro bombings. With Crocus City, they still couldn't manage to blame Ukraine. So on the one hand, they wanted to, but on the other, well, it didn't work out. Overall, the situation is very difficult for Putin. And you know what else is telling? The gap between the image painted by Russian propaganda and reality has become so huge that now any move will play against Putin. If he goes, it's against him. If he doesn't go, if he just croaks something, then that's also against him in terms of how he's perceived. Right now, in terms of how his core nuclear electorate sees him. That is, from the perspective, my opinion, of the average gold-toothed hawthorn tincture warrior. Let me explain. Zelensky said, "I'm waiting for you one-on-one in Istanbul on Thursday." Trump said, "Ceasefire. In Istanbul, let's see how much you want peace." The collective Anglo-Saxons said, "Ceasefire." So what does the Z-Patriot expect from Putin? What kind of answer? Of course, something like the following. "Oh, why even talk to those overseas types, Nazis and the rest? Just nuke them and be done with it." So what answer are they expecting? No one has the right to tell Putin what to do. We are Russians. God is with us. We've always defeated everyone. Our grandfathers fought. We can do it again, blah, 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 Tagil and so on. That's the kind of answer they're expecting from Putin, that no one can tell him what to do, anywhere. Just watch now, as soon as Putin says a word on Tache, as soon as he speaks, they'll all shut up over there. So that's the kind of answer the average Z-Patriot is waiting for. After that, he grabs a plastic bag from his stash, puts on that faded t-shirt with Putin's portrait in a pilot cap, and heads to the store. On the way, of course, he curses the USA, LGBT, and Ukraine for messing up his entire building entrance. That's how it's going to be. By the way, I've already encountered this more than once. And actually, there's an interesting point in the comments here as well. The bigger the channel gets, right now we already have 415,000 subscribers. We're growing, and for that I'm very grateful to you. So usually there are 1,000 comments or more, and Russians come in and start complaining. I don't mean Russians who love Putin, Putin's followers, because there are Russians who are fighting for Ukraine, let me remind you. For example, the Freedom of Russia Legion, which we're currently raising funds for, and the RDK. These are Russians with Russian passports who have taken up arms and are fighting for Ukraine and for their own Russia. There are Russians who donate, who help the armed forces of Ukraine. So I've repeatedly seen Putin's followers grumble that Putin is somehow being too soft with Ukraine and with Europe. And now the US is issuing some kind of ultimatums as well. They say, we need to respond, we need to show how powerful we are, how mighty Russia is, right? But it can't. In other words, the end of the story is already somewhere near. By the way, realizing this, people are starting to treat Russia in a way they never did before the full-scale invasion. In fact, even in a way they didn't after the annexation of Crimea. For example, Poland is closing the Russian consulate general in Krakow, and recently Tusk, who was in Kyiv, accused Russia of the large-scale fire at the shopping center in Warsaw in 2024 and stated the following: in connection with the evidence that Russian special services committed this shameful terrorist act, this shameful act of sabotage against the shopping center, I have decided to close this Russian consulate general in Krakow. Well, Zakharova, of course, made an appearance. It was tough after the weekend, but she showed up and called this decision inadequate, stating that Russia would respond to it. Well, that's just fine. Why are you so outraged? Tell me, Zakharova, what's there to be outraged about? You have new friends now, after all. Who cares about Poland now? You have Kim Jong-un, you have Burkina Faso. By the way, the story about North Korean resorts has quieted down a bit, but we won't let it fade away. There, Kim Jong-un has built specifically for new guests what he considers to be a gigantic resort now, and I quote, "This summer, Russians will be able to discover a new travel destination." In June, the enormous Wonsan Kalma resort in North Korea will welcome its first guests. The project was named the North Korean Benidorm after the famous Spanish resort they tried to copy. But there's nothing new here, right? Whether it's Russia or North Korea, they can't do it themselves, so they try to copy, but even copying doesn't work out well. According to reports, this right here, this is the most interesting part. According to local media, there are pristine beaches and luxurious hotels there. Kim Jong-un was there. He walked around with his daughter, and get this. The resort has its own unique feature, view of the missile test range where ballistic weapons are tested. Well, I think that's just wonderful. At the beginning of January, Kim Jong-un visited Wonsan Kalma with his daughter, and they took a walk along the coast and watched a ballistic missile launch. How wonderful, right, friends? But honestly, it all seems kind of surreal to me. But for Russia, it doesn't even seem surreal anymore. Every time the conversation turns to Kim Jong-il, I just can't deny myself the pleasure, and to delight you as well, of visiting the website of the Korean Central News Agency. It's my personal cringe dealer. On this site, they publish news primarily, of course, about Kim Jong-il and how great he is. I think you've noticed that whenever he inspects some facility or even just walks somewhere, there are always some old men in giant caps running after him, covered in medals on both sides, like an iconostasis, jotting things down in their little notebooks. Well, what they're writing down are his most valuable instructions. And then, from these most valuable instructions, we get these kinds of priceless news stories. I actually grabbed this news item for you straight from the Telegraph agency's website. This is just classic. So the news item is titled, "There is even a special section in Russian called Translated News." The headline, "Paying close attention to the temperature of the storage cabinet." This happened when Kim Jong-un visited the Taedonggang fish restaurant in Pyongyang. Respected comrade Kim Jong-un, while inspecting various areas of the restaurant, approached the counter where processed fish products are sold. Comrade Kim Jong-un carefully examined the display case, which contained many types of fish, including sturgeon, chum salmon, and other seafood. And suddenly, he fixed his gaze on the thermometer. I'm reading this verbatim. Sometimes there are nuances in translation. He fixed his gaze, and the eyes of the managerial staff also turned to the thermometer. But they didn't understand what Kim Jong-un wanted from them. And Comrade Kim Jong-un said to the managerial staff, "The temperature should be regulated properly. If the temperature in the cabinet is too low, it will freeze the canned goods which diminishes their pleasant taste. And that's the end. Looking at Comrade Kim Jong-un, who does not allow even the slightest shortcomings in work for the people, the managerial staff reaffirmed their determination to fulfill their duty as loyal servants of the people. Basically, this nuclear cheburek Nyan rolled up to the thermometer and said, keep an eye on the temperature. And that's how news is made. Well, about the sturgeon and whale for North Koreans, I think you get the idea, right? Clearly, not everyone does. It's actually amazing how in Russia they still haven't just taken all this and copied it. But what's there to copy? Just take what once existed. The cult of personality around Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Just take it and stretch it right over. The bald blunder. Although that, well, it was exactly the same, just like this. How? It's amazing there aren't poems about Putin in those extracurricular reading textbooks, in the lessons about the important things. Putin in Sokolniki, Putin and the stove maker. When Putin was little, with curly hair, he also used to run around in felt boots on an icy hill. Well, that would be cool, right? And they would portray Putin as such a kind person. And by now, of course, he would already be Grandpa Putin. It's simple. He would have gone through Lenin's entire path in the cult of personality. Another piece of news from the series Pages of Great Russia. I couldn't pass by this news. I think you'll like it too. In the Zabaikalsky Krai, a state of emergency has been in effect for over a month due to wildfires. The day before, the fire came right up to the regional capital, Chita, and the Chita diocese announced that prayer services for rain would be held from May 11th to 18th. We call on everyone, each and every person, to join in collective and individual prayer, the diocese stated. Prayers for rain. And believe me, the pipe, a piece of pipe that served as a model of the pipe in Sudzha, placed in front of the church in Yekaterinburg, where Russians would crawl inside and walk through it to try to feel what those ghouls felt as they crawled through that pipe. That's nothing compared to this. Prayer services for rain. A church. The Ministry of Defense's church, painted in khaki. That's Russia in a nutshell. So if you think this is just some cringe-worthy stuff, or that they're blessing ballistic missiles, just recently, one of the clergy said, no, Russia will always bring you more cringe than you ever wanted. And as for you, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and let's keep believing in the armed forces of Ukraine. Support the fundraiser if you can. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Wishing us all a peaceful day. And of course, glory to Ukraine.